Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
A great prophet has appeared among us. God has visited the people.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
May Christ be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Christ.
A person with leprosy approached Jesus, knelt down, and begged, "If you are willing, you can heal me." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out a hand, touched the person with leprosy, and said, "I am willing, be cleansed." Immediately, the leprosy disappeared, and the person with the disease was cured. Jesus gave a stern warning and sent the person off. "Not a word to anyone," Jesus said. "Go off and present yourself to the priest and make an offering for your healing as Moses commanded, as a testimony to the religious authorities." But the person who had been healed went off and began to proclaim the whole matter freely, making the story public. As a result, it was no longer possible for Jesus to enter a town openly, and Jesus stayed in lonely places. Even so, people kept coming to him from all directions. The good news of Christ Jesus.
Praise to you, O Christ.
As you all know, I have re-entered into the world of education, and I am back again in middle school. Middle schoolers are often described as the ones who need love so much at the time that they are the most unlovable. They really can be horrible and mean little beings, yet they often are just like us, but without a filter. It seems that part of our job as educators is to provide them with a filter so that they can be more appropriate. And hopefully we are teaching them morals and maybe some critical thinking so that they can develop into people who are not so hateful and not so overly judgmental. But if we are not accomplishing that, then there is a goal of helping them to just develop that filter that allows them to be more socially appropriate until the time that their mind develops to where they have a more humane view of life. But this task is really, really hard because at the same time middle schoolers are expressing their sometimes very inappropriate opinions, they are also trying to protect themselves from the same judgments they have on others. Bullies complain about being bullied. Gossips hate it when they are the focus of the latest gossip. The ones going through puberty and are beginning to question their own orientation are usually the first to make fun of those who they believe are part of the LGBTQ community. In all, middle school students are often just like us, but more so. While wanting to be included with friends and fellow students, they search to see how to bond with each other on exclusion. Don't we as a culture often do the same thing? Who can we make unclean? Who can we exclude while being socially acceptable? Even more, How can we make it that those who embrace the ones who are unclean will be considered unclean themselves? The cooties, they're very contagious. Middle school kids, they tend to accurately pick out the lepers that the greater society also excludes. The homeless. We have gotten to a point in our culture where homelessness is such a fact of life that it is okay to make fun of it. Who remembers the days without homelessness anymore? The students today don't believe that such a time even existed. They haven't witnessed it, and neither have their parents. And somehow students can always figure out who their homeless classmates are. And like the greater society, it is acceptable to see them as unclean and to blame them for their predicament, and ultimately throw their hands up in the air and say, what am I supposed to do about it? It's a fair question. Special ed students, talk about a stigma. No student wants to be known as special. One of the greatest insults in the hallway is to call someone sped. Some students' filters are so poor that they will approach a special ed student and ask out loud, I saw you in that class, are you sped? The SPED students, or the special ed students with a learning disability rather than a developmental disability, suffer from this stigma the most. And often, these are the same students who will call other special education students SPED. LGBTQ, oh, how I want to believe as a society that we have come so far on this issue. Just like so many of us believe that we have advanced civil rights much farther than what we actually have. Do students still have issue with this topic? Yes, I have been educated to know this year. Make no mistake. Is it surprising that there is a faction of the greater society that wants to backtrack on the progress made for the LGBTQ community? African Americans, wouldn't it be great if it was cliche to include this group? But it isn't. It is still very real, more real than I wanted to admit. The N-word still exists in middle schools as well as on our streets. Calling blacks monkeys and apes has not gone away. Even black kids will call other black kids these names based on the lightness or darkness of the skin. I wish this weren't true, but it is. And in Washington. Is it a surprise that our laws are changing to a point that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is being washed? With a few of my students, 2 classes, we are reading together the old book, Black Like Me. If you haven't read Black Like Me, just a real quick synopsis on it. It is John Griffin. He's a guy from Fort Worth, Texas, who decides that he is going to start touring the South as a black man. He gets a doctor, he takes different drugs, and he goes under different lamps, and he transforms, and he looks like a black man, and he starts traveling through the South in 1959 for that experience. And it is quite an experience, and if you've read it, he experiences hand-on what it means to be segregated, what it means to not be able to get a job despite any of the skills that you might have, and he finds this whole community that he didn't know he had before, and even though he knew in his head how bad it would be, he then understands it from an experiential level as a black man. So we're reading this, the kids are really loving it, they're getting into it. The class I have is extremely diverse. We have black, we have Hispanic, we have white, we have Muslim, we have Christian. So it's a pretty diverse group that we're reading this with. And to my pleasant surprise, these kids are into it. They are loving it. And so we'll talk about the book after we've read a little bit, a few of the pages of what was it like then, what is it like now, have things changed? So we get to this part where John Griffin is on a bus and he's leaving New Orleans and he is going to Mississippi. And they're making a very big thing about Mississippi, that of the racist places in the South, nothing can be worse than what Mississippi is. And so as they're getting on the bus, it's 1959, and even though the bus boycott is over, and even though there's not supposed to be segregation on the bus, because they're going to Mississippi, nobody messes with it, and they self-segregate themselves on the bus. So whites are in the front, blacks are in the back. They're going to Hattiesburg first. And one of the first things that happens is they stop for a rest. And during this rest, the bus driver is not, he's allowing all the whites to leave the bus. They can take their bathroom breaks, they can go for their break, but he will not let the blacks off the bus. He will not let them use the restroom. It's just not being allowed. And they complied with it because they don't want anything to happen. They don't want anything worse to happen. That scene happens, they go on, and they're going to a place called Poplarville, and the bus gets really quiet, especially with the black population, because Poplarville is an area where a grand jury has decided not to indict 4 white men who went into a jail, and they took out a person who was awaiting trial, a black man, and they lynched him. And they said there was not enough evidence, not this, that, or the other, and they were just allowed to go free on this. And there's a lot of murmuring within the crowd of how could this happen, why could this happen, and yet at the same time of knowing that you can't say much right now in the situation on that bus at that moment. So the kids are hearing all this. They're getting mad, they're getting angry. We're also looking at Martin Luther King, we're looking at Malcolm X and what the differences of them were, and they're able to talk about it pretty well. As we go on in the book, they go from Hattiesburg to Poplarville, and when there's this gentleman who gets on the bus, and his name is Christoph. And Christoph is a very good-looking black man. He is dressed very well, his hair is slicked back, and as he starts in the front of the bus, he is very kind, very good-natured with the white passengers. When he gets to the back and he's sitting with the black people on the bus, he's ugly, he's rude, he's insulting, and he's insulting towards the blacks that are there. And he speaks to John Griffin, he goes, well, you look like you might be educated. And as Christoph is speaking, he's showing that he might have some knowledge of French, he might have some knowledge of Latin, he's able to, he's Catholic, he is just showing that he has this sense of knowledge. And at one time even saying that he had wanted to be a Catholic priest. Doesn't go into why he wasn't, but you're left as a reader of kind of going, did his skin color make him not able to pursue things that he was wanting to pursue? It ends with he's getting off the bus, but he makes it very clear that he was born with a mark on him and how much he wished that he was white and not black. So we started talking about that in the class, and I'm really thinking we have changed as a society on this. And so I asked, I go, does that even happen anymore, that people still wish that they weren't black and they wish they were white? And the black kids, almost in unison, goes, oh yeah. And I'm just going, middle schoolers here in Washington, where this is supposed to be one of the most liberal places in the country, and that we would still have that type of belief and that type of feeling. And so again, I ask more on it. It's like, does stuff like this happen to you? And a boy talking about being in the neighborhood, riding with some of his white friends, an adult coming out and saying, we don't allow your kind in our house. talking about how they have gone to stores and they're followed around. And it was just very eye-opening to me because I'm thinking, wow, we have come a far way, haven't we? Haven't we? And maybe not quite as far as we want, and how we create this sense of leprosy within our own society that sometimes I even think we, and I'll speak about this group here, I think we're pretty woke. I think we're a group that really wants to do the right thing, and I know at least for me, I'm thinking I'm in touch, but wow, my kids let me know just how out of touch I still am on this topic. We have our lepers today, and the rules are such that if we try to change the status quo, we can either be labeled a leper or get in trouble for trying to alleviate the sufferings of the lepers in our midst. Health departments giving fines to churches for providing shelter to the homeless, making it unlawful to give water to migrants traveling through the desert. Jesus in the gospel today provides the best countercultural response to the situation. He breaks the law, literally and figuratively. He touches the unclean leper against the written law, against the social law. And in the Gospel of Matthew and John, he did this after the Sermon on the Mount. He walked the talk. And by doing the right thing, he was criticized by the holy leaders. Could there be a better compliment? But when we look at it, it really ultimately is a joyful story. We can choose to rid the social construct of creating lepers. And we can ask ourselves, how do we continue to be the cure of modern day leprosies?